Welcome to Behavior Grooves, the podcast that explores the mysteries of our human condition with a behavioral science lens. I'm Kurt Nelson.
And I'm Tim Houlihan. This is part 2 of our 2-part series on habits and routines and rituals.
We did it. We were not supposed to do that scary, weird thing anymore.
Okay, in the first episode, we talked about how habits can get started, how they can positively impact our lives, and hopefully listeners came away with some really good ideas. Now, in this episode's different. What are we going to talk about in this episode, Kurt?
In this episode, we're going to focus on taking habits and routines to the next level.
To 11!
To put them to work at helping you find your groove. And we're going to discuss not only, we discussed how to start habits last time, but oftentimes we want to stop habits, right? We want to stop those negative habits, the smoking, the eating that chocolate cake every night, or my ice cream, as I like to say, that those kind of habits. So that are, we can help you stop those habits that are keeping you from finding your groove.
Okay. Before we get started, though, can we just talk a little bit about sort of the neuroscience behind where habits come from? We've talked about all the cues, the rewards, talked about the routines, all the things that go into sort of how we form those habits. But where do they actually exist, and why is that meaningful?
Yeah, so brain research, as much as it can change day by day. But right now, the best brain research is showing that the habits are basically formed or live in the basal ganglia, a structure deep in the brain center. And that's responsible for habit formation. And when habits have been established and formed, that is where when that trigger happens, that sets the routine off. And note that the basal ganglia is also involved in a lot of other processes. It's not no part of the brain is really specifically exclusively for one type of behavior or different pieces of this. But the basal ganglia is really, they know that good research on emotion, reward processing, which makes sense if we think about habits, right? Learning and movement, all of those things are kind of at least run through the basal ganglia. And as part of this, it's really important to understand that from a brain structure, it's multifaceted in what it's doing.
So when I decide that I want to have a habit of putting my napkin in my lap when I sit down to dinner, rather than taking the napkin and throwing it across the room, for instance, I want to develop.
Because that's your current habit.
That's my norm, and but that's actually happening in a very specific portion of my brain. That's actually happening in the basal ganglia. The executive function still has an operant ability. It does not relinquish control in habitual behavior. So
right. Anne Graybill at MIT has worked on like the finding where all of this stuff is, the basal ganglia, and some of that work, but also looking at some other things. And if you, as you mentioned, like you're not forming the habit of putting the napkin on your lap, that is a habit that you actually have. You got that from when you were a child, right? That was what you did. So when you go to a restaurant, there's a napkin, you just habitually unfold it, put it into your lap. The idea, though, is that, okay, today I see others and they're not doing that. They're doing something different. So I can actually override my habit to follow the social norms. Or I determine that I don't want to put the napkin in my lap because we're going to have lobster, and lobster is really messy. I need to tuck it into my shirt. You can override a habit. And so this is a really important piece, because we often think, well, it's a habit, I can't do anything about it, but you can. And particularly as we talk about overcoming negative or bad habits, is they're not set in stone. You are not just at the whims of the habits that have been, the grooves in your brain, Tim, that have been formed. That needle can stick, it can be brought out of those grooves, and you can play a new tune.
Anne Graybill would also argue that because of this, right, that even though habits can be deeply ingrained, that the brain's planning centers can shut them off. So it's not like a habit is just drives us into just this automatic behavior all the time. We have the ability to override. We have the ability to shut them off. We have the ability to change. And I think that that's a good thing because it reminds me of the conversation that we had with Jody Wellman recently when
Mm.
Jody said, and I'm going to quote her here, she said, habits are the insidious things that rob us of our aliveness or alive-aliciousness. So right, and that's that, and of course she sees how habits can get in the way of sense foraging, for instance, of really appreciating everything that's going on because of the automaticity of habits.
And I think there's a really important lesson from that, that there is a value in being purposeful about our habits. Sometimes there is really, we get benefits of habits. We talked about
Yep.
that last time, right?
Yep.
Cognitive reduction. We have consistency when we're trying to achieve goals.
Yep.
But they can also, as she said, put us into this automatic mode where we are robots through our life. And that is the part where we miss so much, or we can miss so much, because every morning I'm going to just, I have my egg, 2 eggs poached and a piece of dry toast with my black coffee, and I do X, and I just go through it's like you're living your life in a perpetual motion that is just routine after routine after routine after routine. And there's no novelty. There's nothing to break up the sameness. There
Yep.
is an aspect of the mundane, that even things that shouldn't be mundane become mundane because we become habituated to the routine. And there are times when we need to break that up and to live life.
This might be a really critical part of something that you just mentioned, and that if our lives are dominated by too many routines or too many habits, then if we're not experiencing any kind of novelty. We're not experiencing sort of that freshness, or as our guests in the past have talked about, sense foraging. That we're losing our sensitivity to the world in terms of what we feel and touch and smell and taste. That's when habits can absolutely get in the way. If we're literally just eating just because it's time to eat and we're not enjoying any of the food, that can be problematic if it's literally every time.
We're efficient.
Yeah.
We can be super efficient, and there is a cost to that efficiency. So this idea that I want to live healthier and do different things, well, that also can rob us of the joy of eating an ice cream. I just don't know how people could give up. I mean, this idea of being so efficient at work because I always do this gives up this idea of building communal bonds with people, because you are always on to the next task or various different things, or even paying notice of people, and maybe your work is causing them additional work that they're not ready to take on. So lots of different ways that habits and routines can actually be very debilitating to living a life in your groove, and really savoring moments and appreciating the novelty that life can bring and should bring to us.
So, does your flossing routine or habit deprive you of anything in your life? Are you sad that you're not grateful and super excited every time you floss to go, my life is so much better now?
So this is interesting, right? Because this is a really good point. That's perfectly fine, at least in my take. And actually, there's an aspect of this that the act that I had of flossing my teeth before, which was random, and I would do it sometimes and not do it others. I wasn't grateful for it when I was doing it randomly and not with a habitual routine type moment. I am actually grateful sometimes when I think about, I have been doing this consistently for very long, and I have, good, oral hygiene now because of it. And I can be very grateful for that
So
aspect
you do
that
you
I wouldn't have other words. So in other words, there's an aspect of this that actually is the counter argument to what we've just said, is that we can actually savor and enjoy some of these routines in a different manner,
okay?
um, because we are achieving our goals, because I have lost X number of pounds, because I have, done my work efficiently, that I have now got the promotion, that I have written a page a day and I have a book done. And you can savor those in there. You just have to be, I think we have to really be purposeful in understanding which routines will help us and how much they cost us.
I think that that's pretty interesting that you're actually taking a very simple and mundane act and making it virtuous because of these long-term rewards that you have, and you're actually finding short-term rewards in the progress that you're making. I,
Yeah.
I think that is super cool. So, okay,
So we've identified that not all habits are good. So if we have a
yes.
bad habit, how do we break it? You know?
Well, I think we got to start at the same place that we started when we said, what is the new habit that we want to create? We have to start with identifying what the habit is. Like, let's
Yeah.
actually, it may sound rudimentary, but if you've got a bad habit that you want to stop, it's going to be a behavior change initiative. So, what is the desired behavior or the undesired behavior, right? That you want? Actually,
Right.
you have something to say about that.
Well, so this is a quote, and I don't know who said it, but I've repeated it for years now in this work of change, is that, make the desired behavior easy and make the undesired behavior hard. This is this idea of adding friction into these behaviors
Yes.
to help you overcome that, to have your executive function be able to, oh, I need to stop this and do something else. And I don't need to have that cigarette right now. I don't need to mindlessly, eat my 2 eggs and dry toast and black coffee this morning, that I can add some variety into this. And that is, that's more of a purposeful behavior that is there, but it's these unintentional behaviors sometimes that are really hard because we oftentimes don't even notice them. And so it's
Right.
noticing, as you said, what is that behavior or that response that we want to stop. And sometimes it is a response, it is an emotional response to X when X happens.
And as you talk about adding friction, I go back to the COM-B model: capability, opportunity, and motivation, COM, equaling behavior or leading to the behavior. Adding friction isn't just it shouldn't be just a thoughtless thing. Where do you want to add friction? Do you want to add friction around capability? Do you want to make it more difficult physically, or opportunity? Is there a social side of this where you want to add friction to or is it motivation? Is it that you somehow want to add friction to what is driving you to do it? Give it some thought, because if you're, for instance, if you're drinking too much with a bunch of friends every time you go out for happy hour, that bunch of friends is a social cue. That's an opportunity cue. That's something that you can moderate by setting a timer and saying, I'm going to leave after 20 minutes. I'm going to see everybody, but I'm going to go, or I'm not going to join them, in the future. There are things you can do to stop that habit by understanding that it is a social opportunity to add friction to, not just motivation.
Right. And I think you bring up a really good point. And many of the things that we want to stop are driven by the behaviors that others or that we exhibit when we're with others. In other words,
Mm-hmm.
if you always get mad when you are with your uncle because your uncle just pushes whatever buttons that you have, or a certain friend. So, how do you, again, make that undesired behavior or response, that undesired response, how do you make that harder, more difficult? And so you're less likely to happen, and you can remove yourself from those situations. I talk all the time about behavior change, and a woman talked about this. She had a spending problem. So I was doing a workshop, and she was talking, and we were asking, like, what? So how do people do this? And she said, "Look, I have a problem. I get online, and this was before." They had the automatic kind of things in there, but I would go online and I'd see something and I'd just buy it. So I'd get my credit card out and I'd go do it. So what she did is she put her credit card in a bowl of water and put it in the freezer. And she created friction. So if she wanted to buy something, she had to take that, like she knew she was going shopping the next day. She'd take the bowl out, leave it out overnight, and she would have her credit card. But if she was online and found something, oh, this is a great deal, and I'm going to buy 10 of them, well, now she has to go and take the bowl out, and maybe she can run it under hot water and try to fasten it, but still it's that time. And so you're creating friction. And again, changes the dynamic. It was no longer a habitual response. It was a thought out response. And you added in that time and the friction that goes between it.
Right. It wasn't that the credit card was gone. If she wanted her executive function to overrule and say, no, I do want my credit card now, she could do that. But that is a great example in COM-B of a capability of friction. She added capability friction, and that slowed her down. So this kind of just gets back to the idea that it's not always about motivation. It's not always about motivation. There was a quote from Mark Twain. I just want to actually just say this, because I think when it comes to starting and stopping habits, it's not a bad idea to turn to literature. And Mark Twain said, "Habit is habit, and not to be flung out the window by any man, but coaxed downstairs one stair at a time." So in the formation of habits, we think about going slow and being gentle on yourself. And I think the same is true when it comes to breaking habits. Be gentle on yourself.
You can't just throw it out the window. You have to walk it down those stairs. It's going to take, you know what? It's not like, oh, open the window. It's done. I'm done. All right. Wipe my hands of this. No. I got to take that habit by its hand. Got to take it slow, one step at a time.
That's right.
Down those set of stairs. That's great. And I think there's another piece, and I think, Charles Duhigg or James Clear talks about this is don't judge yourself. Be realistic.
Yeah.
Understand that you are going to have times where, again, if I remember my statistics right for, people who are going through, alcohol recovery and going through different programs, most of the time it doesn't stick the first time. Right. It's multiple times that you need to do this. Same things are for some of these really ingrained habits, is that you will have setbacks, that you will, again, I did fantastic earlier this year on Weight Watchers and losing weight and doing different things. And then, I lost over 20 pounds and I put 7 of those pounds back on, 8 maybe now as of yesterday after that cake. I don't know, but but I realized that now I have to reassess and go back into saying, all right, what was I doing? And I think that's important. With that, Tim, one of the things that we haven't talked about is replacing the bad habit with a new one.
Yes.
Right? So it isn't always about just stopping. It's how do we replace?
Yeah.
And so instead of, and they've done a lot of really good work on this with smoking cessation. The idea that, all right, I always used to smoke at 3:00 at this, coffee break, or I'd smoke with coffee, or I'd smoke when I drink. So what can you replace that? Because then you're overriding that behavior. And again, going back up to, some of the work by Anne Graybiel, there's some really cool stuff about, you can override those. There's still that behavior is there, that habit is there, but you override it, that new one takes precedence. So.
Absolutely. The continuing story is that these are behaviors. These behaviors influence your quality of life. They influence how you feel about yourself. They impact your self perception. And so, being thoughtful about the kind of behaviors that you want to start and stop can add to your general sense of well being.
So, with that, folks, this concludes our 2-part mini series on habits and routines and
Rituals. Yeah.
thank you. I couldn't say it in the strange voice that you do that with.
Rituals.
So, God, that's freaky. Don't do that. Stop that habit. Anyway, so hopefully you guys came away with something that is of value that you can take away about learning new habits, about why we use habits, being purposeful about them, and about stopping the bad ones.
Yeah.
And use that in your life as you move forward. So
yeah, put them to use in your life. Exactly. And share this with other groovy people who can benefit from being in their groove. But most importantly, we want you to use our discussion about habits and routines this week
and rituals
to go out and find your groove.
Oh my God, I don't believe I said it in that whispery voice. Sorry.